Hey everyone, how's it going? It is Alex from riffandrock.com. Haven't done a roundup yet this year. We're nearing the end of February. We're in the second half. I didn't do one in December due to the holidays. I didn't do one in January just due to time. I have a mountain of things to get, and I was thinking about how do I want to do that moving forward. Do I constantly just want to be writing and overusing the word fun when describing music? Or did I want to try something a little bit different this year for 2018? And ultimately, that's what I landed on. So in between our regular music talk episodes, I'm going to be creating these little mini roundup episodes where I can kind of shotgun through some albums, provide some quick analyses, give you some recommendations, give you some avoids, and we'll see how it goes. It might work. It might not. You never know how all this shit happens. So I've been listening to obviously quite a lot of stuff since December. One thing I wanted to touch on right off the bat, or one album I want to start off right off the bat. Listen to this one in December. It was Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach. Most people know Philip Glass as sort of a joke, as a parody of a composer producing ultra minimal music with lots of loops, lots of repetitions. And so this is the first time I've listened to a full Philip Glass opera. I've listened to a couple orchestral pieces, but this is obviously a much larger beast to digest. It's at 3.5 hours long, and my understanding is the performance itself is even longer, and Glass actually encourages you to come in and out of the performance. It is a huge undertaking to digest this album, and digesting it in one go would probably be mentally exhausting, but I really enjoyed this one. But I also do really enjoy minimalistic music. Bear that in mind. Lots of little loops that make subtle shifts and subtle changes as they progress. So you'll have these 20-minute tracks, these 10-minute tracks, and as they flow, the little tiny micro loops that are existing within the track start evolving and start shifting. So there's this hypnotic nature that really sucks you in and pulls you along. But as it's pulling you along, every moment is just a little bit different, a little bit unique as it progresses in the music. It has this very repetitive feel, has this very hypnotic feel, really sucks you in. There's a denseness despite its simplicity, because you get sucked into 20 different instruments doing these tiny little repetitions over and over again. So it's got this very engaging, very engrossing feel to it. I can't recommend it enough, but with the huge caveat of it is not an easy listen by any stretch of the imagination. It is exhausting, and for someone who may not be into highly minimalistic music, it's going to probably just come off as an exercise in tedium and exhaustion and annoyance. The singing is very repetitive, and it's in nonsense syllables, except for periodically where it's talking in numbers. So you'll have some segments that are just 1, 2, 2, 1. But if you're into something experimental and kind of wondering where a lot of minimalistic music got its influences from, I cannot recommend Einstein on the Beach by Philip Glass enough. Back in 2017, it feels so long ago, we reviewed the second album by a band called Songhoi Blues. I got a chance to listen to their first album, Music in Exile, not that long ago, just a couple weeks back. And just like the first album, I really liked this album. Some really creative rock music with strong cultural roots that really are exciting to the listener. My only gripe is that the really intense tracks are all at the front of the album, and then it starts getting slower and more mellow as the album progresses. Nothing wrong with the mellow tracks, it's just the pacing can be a little off, is that you have this very bold introduction, gritty blues kind of sounds, and then it really slows down near the end in a lot more ballads. But if you listened to Resistance, their second album, Music in Exile is going to sound familiar, maybe a little raw, maybe a little less certain, as this is an earlier album. They're still trying to figure themselves out a little bit more. But you have these really high-flying guitar parts where less just chord strumming, but individual picking to create these very lush melodies. Ultimately, I didn't like this one as much as Resistance, but I thought it was definitely worth the listen, and at 40 minutes, you're not going to be disappointed. Speaking of other albums that I really enjoyed over the past couple months, I'm going to butcher the name of this one, so my apologies, folks. Verckys et l'Orchestre Vévé It is from the record label Analog Africa, and that's the name of the artist. And then the album is Congolese Funk, Afrobeat, and Psychedelic Rumba, 1969 to 1978. It's a real catchy title here. It's a compilation album of Congolese funk style music from the 60s and 70s, as you can imagine. I'm a big fan of this area of music. I think a lot of funk and disco kind of got bastardized and completely ruined as it came to the States. It got really simplistic. A lot of the intricacies got sucked out in favor of big dance hits that you could dance to while totally jacked on cocaine. These songs really reflect the unique polyrhythmic nature of African music that is so engaging. Multiple things are happening at once. It's not just one giant wave of rhythm coming at you. It's multiple different things, multiple concentric circles going on at once, so it really pulls you in. And this album, spanning a large time span, reflects the creative nature of this group, this Verckys et l'Orchestre Vévé. And so it shifts from very funky, very dance heavy to a little bit trippy too. All of that being said, I have mixed feelings about these releases, in the sense that Analog Africa, this German record company, is buying the rights to this music and is releasing these sort of hodgepodge compilations of it. On one hand, this is probably one of the smallest opportunities we're going to get to listen to a lot of this music. I think original releases were very small, very limited, and so the cost of these releases has to be pretty high at this point. Conversely, though, are these artists being properly compensated, if they're still alive, for the work they've put together? And because we're getting these hodgepodge releases, are we being then denied the opportunity to listen to full albums by the artists? My hope ultimately is that Analog Africa will, if there's enough popularity surrounding some of these releases, start releasing the proper albums by these artists, giving them proper compensation for their music. I don't know anything about the deals that are being struck. My worry is that they are approaching old record labels or people who have the rights, just saying, hey, we're going to give you a small sum of money for them, and it's being handed over because there's no money being made on it at the moment. I don't know anything about factually if this is the case, but exploitation for the sake of profit is something pretty common even in the music industry. So you're left wondering a little bit who's being taken care of in these situations. I don't know if this is the case, like I said, and I hope it's not. But ultimately, I do love the releases they're putting out. The packaging on Analog Africa's releases is immaculate. Very high quality product. The vinyls are 180 gram. The books, they come with these books that have a lot of information on the artist and their history, so they're at least paying respect in that sense. I just hope on a financial sense they're also taking care of these people too. But not all albums I listened to in the past while have been wonderful. There's a couple duds along the way. One was Antwoord, 2016 release, Mount Ninji and The Nice Time Kid. You know, credit where credit's due. I did listen to a full Antwoord album. That is something I've now accomplished in my life. Antwoord is a South African rave hip-hop group mixing rhymes with intense dance beats. So you might remember them from the song I Think You Freaky, Baby's on Fire, Fanny Fanny Boom Boom I think was another one as well. Always been a little quirky, a little bit weird, exceptionally white trash. In a South African way. So and they're proud of it. They own their identity. It never seems like a shtick. It never seems like a gimmick. It's just, this is who we are. We are kind of dumpster diving musicians. And so it works to their favor because it's unabashed. They are full force about the nonsense that they seem to be. The problem is that it doesn't always translate very well. There are moments where that grittiness, that dirtiness, that trashiness actually comes off really interesting. It's engaging. It kind of makes you envious for not being in the world that they're existing. So like the song like Baby's on Fire, the song I Think You Freaky, they're grimy, they're dirty, but they're also really intense and engaging. Nothing on this album really got me in the same kind of way. And also the skits are just terrible. Songs like Wings on My Penis or You Like Boobies, or Jonah Hill, which stops halfway because the song, quote, sounds too gay. I'm not making that up. It's 2016, and that's what we're doing here. Really just take away from the potential that this kind of music could have. Songs like Banana Brain and even Daddy aren't that bad. They have some engaging dance beats, but overall the whole thing just never quite clicks for me. It's a little too over the top at times. And when you're creating this kind of music, I think there's a fine line you're riding between it's taking itself too seriously and is falling into self-parody and it's a total schlock fest. It never grabbed me. It never engaged me the way I would want it to. The singles these guys put out are always, despite being mind-bendingly bizarre, they're always a treat because you're kind of like, what the fuck are they on about? But as a whole experience, and this being the only time I've ever listened to a full Antwoord album, I could not recommend it. It was just an exhausting listen, and it's almost an hour long, which is a lot to handle. The album covers them sitting in what appears to be a dump, which is almost way too fitting. And another 2016 release I finally got around to on my iTunes was Deadmau5? How do you pronounce this guy's name? Deadmau5 is a electronic musician producing techno and rave style music and other stuff, I'm sure. Please correct me because I know I'm wrong. He's also an outspoken critic of DJs and everything. He had this album in 2016 called W Drive 2016 album / creative title. I'll give you credit for it. I kind of like that. It's just there's an album on my fucking W drive, which also means Deadmau5 has gotten to his W drive. He maybe a few too many hard drives. Maybe he can condense them down a little bit. I am not an expert on techno music. I'm not an expert on trance music, electronic music, however you would kind of categorize this. So even as you can tell, I don't even know exactly which box this album fits in. And possibly just due to a lack of awareness, possibly due to ignorance, or maybe this just isn't that great of an album. At no point was I really excited about it. Every song is, except for the song Glish, is over 5 minutes long, and most of them hitting the 7-8 minute mark. They can all be just exhausting listens because there's not a whole lot of shifting motion going on in the music, a lot of repetition, a lot of very simplistic 4/4 beats. I understand that probably listening to this in certain settings is going to make it a lot more engaging if you're dancing to it at a club, if you're playing it at a rave party. I don't know. I listened to it while exercising. I kind of thought maybe it's going to pump me up, get me excited, but I just was kind of looking for the hook to hit, the something to hit, not necessarily the beat to drop, but just the moment where it starts grabbing me and pulling me in. It creates these sort of textural landscapes for you to kind of get lost in. And there's no big bombast. I appreciate that, but at the same time, there's no moment where you're like, now I'm in, I'm hooked. It has a plottingness to it, a non-offensiveness to it that just accepts that it's existing in the music verse, and that you can engage and disengage at various times when you want. You can listen to it, then walk away, go get yourself a coffee, and then come back and listen to it some more. Maybe in that sense it works. Maybe it's not designed really for you to be interested in it for the full time it's running. But for me, and in the context I listened to it, it's too long. It is so incredibly long. If you would have, and it's about an hour and 20 minutes minus a remix, so it's still about a 70-minute album. If you would have given it a bit of a diet, gotten it down to an hour, I think you could have had a much more interesting album, because each song probably could have lost a little bit of itself, and it probably would have been just as good of songs, and probably as a full cohesive experience, which is how I usually look at albums, not just as individual tracks. It would have been a lot more digestible and probably a lot more manageable. But as a very repetitive album, as a very cyclical album, this is a lot to handle, so I couldn't recommend this one either. Keeping on the trend of electronic music, 2017 is not really an album. It's just an 11-minute collection of nonsense. Death Grips released a promotional video for their tour where they toured with Ministry, Prodigy, one of those bands. I always forget. And in it, they had an electronic drum solo in the background, and then they released it as a single take. It's about 11.5 minutes. It's just called electronic drum solo dub mix in parentheses single take. Death Grips, we reviewed them a million times on the show. I've talked about them a bunch. They're one of my favorite artists. All the shticks that they buy into, all the shticks that they ride, they do it with zero class and zero fucks to give. They've moved away from more the traditional hip hop that preceded that was existing in the first 3 albums, and now they've moved more into dance music, rave music, punk music. They're a lot more all-encompassing. They're a little bit all over the map now, as opposed to being focused on rap, such as on Ex-Military and The Money Store. This little take is very reminiscent of their release, that Crouching Tiger Gabba Mega Mix, but with no lyrics. It's just Zach Hill going ballistic. So it's the first time in a while we've gotten a proper Zach Hill drum solo, which we used to get just on every other day back in 2006. As ridiculous as this was, as nonsensical as it was, I enjoyed it. I like Zach Hill drum solos. I like them in bite-sized forms. Like this, it's blithering nonsense, but it's how would I put it? But there's a specialness to them because no one else drums quite like Zach Hill. And now, instead of being on his regular sort of punk rockish kit, now he's on this electric kit with varying sounds. So there's sort of a textural chaos to it. It's free form. There's no real pattern to anything. It's just sort of these digital percussive noises exploding all around you. But I like that. And at 11.5 minutes, it's a lot shorter than Necromancer, his most notorious solo outing, where him and a piano player just go freestyle for a solid hour. So if you're curious about what Zach Hill's about, this is a good example. And for a lot of Death Grips fans who weren't Zach Hill fans, this is a good example of what he was used to be doing, just in a slightly different modality. And if you like this, it might lead you back to some of his older works, some of the solos like Jamaican Fitness, Necromancer, and then even his solo albums like Face Tat and Astrological Straits. Let's keep with the electronic music theme. Fourt Tet is a intellectual dance music, IDM. I think that's what it stands for. They released an album in 2003, reportedly one of the best albums of the era, called Rounds. And I would agree. This is a bit of a convoluted record in that, unlike most electronic music, which relies heavily on looping patterns, this one is a little bit more erratic, sort of similar to an Aphex Twin album, where it's not just your 4/4 beats on top of each other. There's a shiftingness to it. Pieces don't repeat themselves. It's this very unique type of music that it's not super popular for a lot of reasons. It's not exactly the most friendly to casual listeners. It's not necessarily something you want to dance to, but I think there's something to be said about this style of music. I think the early mid 2000s, there was a lot of popularity surrounding it. Now, obviously, less so. So there's not a whole lot of this style of music being produced at this point. But the disconnected nature of it, the unfriendly nature of it, I really feel demonstrated what could have been for the genre of electronic music. And I think, unfortunately, we didn't go this direction. We went in the more pop-friendly direction. And I think we're all suffering because of it, because this is a demonstration of, if you have someone sitting with their synthesizers on their computer, however they're creating their electronic music, and they really invest some time and effort into creating these unique, polyrhythmic, erratic, multi-time signature sounds, you can make something truly unique and special that challenges the mind and challenges the conventions of what music can be, because this is a style of music that you could play on instruments, but it'd be very difficult to. So this pre-programmed nature allows music to evolve into something that we weren't really doing a whole lot of outside of the more obscure artists or brave artists, your Henry Cow's, Frank Zappa's, Captain Beefheart's, the sort like that. And I think Fourt Tet by Fourt Tet's Rounds is a perfect example of that. It's not particularly friendly. It will bite you, but at the same time, it's not super fast and it's not super erratic in the sense that it's just going to sound like pure oblivion flying through your speakers. It's mellow. It's quiet. But it's an unfriendly mellow and quiet. It's the disturbed kid in the corner that, you don't want to talk to them because they're just a little off, but they're not screaming and hollering like Dave who's eating all the glue. They're just a little quirky, but if you got to know them, you're gonna be like, oh, this person's awesome, and they already know about art films and they know about I don't know, the Smiths or some shit you never heard about in the 6th grade. I can't recommend it enough. I had a real good time listening to this album, even if it tried to kill me a little bit. But I think it's a very good introduction to this style of music, and with not a whole lot of it being produced currently, or at least in the mainstream, let me say that. I think it's a great little slice of what this genre could be and could have been if we would have given it a little bit more attention, a little bit more appreciation. One last one for this roundup. Let's keep with that electronic music theme. Oval's 94 Diskont. While Fourt Tet's Rounds was a little bit experimental, but not truly dangerous to you, Oval's 94 Diskont, released in 1996, is a truly savage experimental electronic experience. While Fourt Tet may have been different, but not necessarily out to kill you, 94 Diskont is out to kill you. A slow, disturbed death. This is a very challenging album to listen to, with a lot of erratic shifts, minimalistic subtleties, and unfamiliar tones and song structures. I am frankly shocked that this was released 22 years ago. That's pretty crazy to think about. When I'm thinking about electronic music, especially sort of this experimental stuff, I kind of figure it's happening much later down in the line. I mean, Fourt Tet's Rounds was almost 10 years after this. This probably being a precursor to that style of music. It is unfriendly to listen to. You have songs like Do While, which are very subtle, very discreet in their sounds and tones. It rolls on for 24 minutes, so it's extremely long. It's not engaging in the sense that there's not a hook, there's not a beat to lay your ears onto. You just have to kind of dive into the slipstream of the sound and hope to God that it starts making sense for you. So it's not going to be a friendly experience. It's not going to be an experience that you're going to really enjoy if you're not into experimental type of music, but that's okay. You really need to be listening to other stuff that's not just oomch, oomch, oomch. This is not that kind of music. It's something you might put on while you're reading, while you're studying. You're not gonna put it on at the party. I wouldn't even recommend putting this on while driving. It's got this nuanceness to it, but the nuance is so in the undercurrent that you're probably not going to catch it the first time around. You're going to be like, well, what the fuck is going on here? It's unabashed in its unformed nature, meaning that it's completely aware that it's not traditional. It's completely aware that it's not following any traditional music formula, and it's accepting of it. The music itself is very exposed to you in that, here I am. Why don't you go ahead and enjoy it? Why don't you go ahead and get lost in this very disturbed experience? The music itself is just, it's these little tones that kind of surface and vanish, and they're disconnected and disoriented. But all these dissonant pieces sort of come together to create this almost soundscape-like experience. But instead of these long textural patterns that you might get like in a Brian Eno or a Robert Frippatronic piece, it's these tiny little fragments that create this larger network. So it's a different way of looking at the soundscape, the long form piece that's the long form formless piece. It's little microscopic things. Instead of getting the big pancake, you're getting the little couscous. How about that for an analogy? It's not light and fluffy. It's little bits of graininess, but as a whole, it's still very nourishing. I enjoyed this album a lot too. And normally, I'm not as big of a electronic music fan compared to more traditional with instruments and things like that. But that being said, this type of music that I listened to a lot in the past couple months really has changed my perspective on it, and really changed my perspective on what this genre of this sort of electronic music can be. Even though this music was created up to 15, 20 years ago, that's kind of crazy to me. That an album such as this was existing that long ago. Not that experimental music wasn't existing back then. I mean, you can go back to Throbbing Gristle, or even artists like Stuart Copeland were creating very dissonant music a long time ago. But when electronic music surfaced, and I'm being super general, bear that in mind, it was either very soundscapey, very dance heavy. Outside of a few artists like your Tangerine Dreams and maybe Popol Vuh's. But to create something this dense and not listener friendly back in 1996, I think is remarkable. And it just shows how ahead of the curve certain artists were, and probably too far ahead of the curve. If this would have come out in 2017, you probably would have found on a best of list. I found this one on a best of the 90s list. I was shocked to find it, and I'm so glad I did, because I would have never imagined this even existed. I'm sure a lot of people were like, would never figure that as well. It's one of the best things I've listened to in a long while. It's going to be a long time before I listen to it again. And I want to recommend it, but at the same time, I know for a lot of listeners, it's just going to be a little, it's not going to be too much. It's going to be not enough, because you're going to be waiting for something to drop. You're going to be waiting for not a beat, but just some sort of explosion to occur. And even if it's a dissonant explosion, and it's not, it's just going to constantly tease you and taunt you. And I think that's special. I think that makes it a really special record, because it operates against all the parameters that it's expected to operate on. So that is our first audio roundup. I'm hoping to try and do one of these around once a week, and so that I can give you little snippets instead of this big dump of information. There's still a lot more to go through. Tune in next time when you might hear reviews about albums like from artists like Antwoord, Ange, Cybotron, maybe some Dave Brubeck.